Well, when I was in Tehran just the other week, I watched a preview of the wonderful movie made by Tadhg Hickey and my good friend and comrade Sean Murray, which linked the Irish and Palestinian struggles, and very powerful indeed it was. He's a very funny man, Tadhg, and now that he's a new father, he's maybe not getting quite so much sleep. Let's find out how it's affecting his performance. Tadhg, welcome to the show. First of all, congratulations on the new baby. Wonderful news. And congratulations also on another new baby, a new series that you're going to launch, a situation comedy series, I think I read it was. We'll let you talk about that later. But we're living now in a time where it's clear that support for Israel is floundering, if not dying. But the people who still support Israel are people with quite a lot of power, including the power to ban and strangle thee and me and take us off platforms and make sure we don't prosper on platforms. Layla, a good friend of ours, was taken out on Twitter today. The kit man at Arsenal Football Club. Imagine, after 20 years of service, gets kicked out for saying something on his own personal Facebook in support of the Palestinians and in opposition to a literal genocide. Do you think we're winning? And when will we be in a position where it is possible freely to speak on these platforms for Palestine?
First of all, thanks so much for having me, George. And yeah, I've got 2 kids now, under 2, if anybody would like to send me on any top tips in it, because I'm slowly losing my mind, but kind of in a good way, because it is beautiful as well. But yeah, no sleep for a while. Hopefully that'll come back. And today, on top of the no sleep, I woke up and I learned that I'd been taken off Instagram. Again, no warnings. Had like about 300,000 followers. Very active page, and if people know Instagram, I use the collaboration feature on it a good bit, which means I was collaborating with various Palestinian, Lebanese groups, fundraisers around the world. So I kind of use the page as part of the community, I suppose, of the resistance and pro-Palestine community. So it's a blow for, I think, a lot of people. And again, yeah, there's no recourse, there's no the appeal system is kind of famously automated, so you appeal and then kind of computer says no effectively, and then you just get permanently banned and they go on about their business. I mean, to answer your question, obviously we're being effective because, as I said in the video today, if you were so sure that you were in the right, if your political ideology was so secure, as Zionists constantly claim that they're in the right, as their supporters claim, as a leader of the Conservative Party in the so-called UK said today, you know, it's a case of right and wrong, and Starmer and others need to be on the right side of history. Well, if you're so convinced that you're right, why do you have to constantly silence and put on the periphery of things any voices of dissent whatsoever? You know, there's been targeted campaigns against, I mean, forget the likes of me. What about like Gary Lineker, Kneecap, the energy, the time, the money that's gone into silencing these voices? It just seems very peculiar to me that you would be claiming you're in the right if you had to go. I mean, if I felt I was in the right, I'd have no problem with listening to opposition voices. In fact, I'm one of those people that I wouldn't silence Zionists at all, particularly Zionist artists. You know, sometimes there's campaigns to silence Zionist artists. I'm of the belief, let representatives from both sides speak and people will make up their own mind. That's what's happened over the last year and a half, that more and more people have looked into the history of Israel and Palestine, and then they've come to their own very secure conclusions that what we're being fed by the Western media is laughably biased. So that's why they banned TikTok, because people were finding out exactly what was going on, particularly young people, and that's why Kneecap are really very much in the eye of the storm right now. It's because what they represent. They represent enlightening and educating young people, telling them at festivals like Glastonbury exactly what's going on. And that's so dangerous. That's so dangerous to Western hegemony, and particularly the Zionist and US empires. I hope, George, I have to believe, or I'd lose my mind, that these people are going to see justice one day, because obviously the Israelis are number 1 in the dock. Their Western backers, I think, are number 2. And then I think number three is the media who have conspired to allow this genocide to go on. I actually can't believe, when I was coming on to speak to you tonight, I was like, I can't believe we're still talking about this. I cannot believe after 19 months, I can't remember the last time I was speaking to you, that we are still at the same point where we're just begging our governments to take some sort of even menial action. Like in Ireland, we're so great with words. Our political class say all the right things. In terms of meaningful actions, none. Our airports are still being used to transport US military to bring weapons to Israel to continue the genocide. We've still got a roaring trade with Israel. It's extraordinary. I can't believe it has gone on this long with no sanctions on this state. And I think we're all seeing just the level of strength that this state has had over the whole world at this point. But I do feel it's collapsing. And I think we can really point the finger at the people who are jumping on the bandwagon afterwards. For now, I would just fall in behind anybody who's calling out the atrocities right now, because we just need to get it to stop right now, you know. So personally, I will drive on. I'll use another page. Other people who haven't been banned, keep going. It's a team. We'll tag in, we'll tag out. For now, the immediate thing is just to get this absolute horror to end.
Now, going back to Kneecap for a minute, Tadhg, it's not my kind of music. I had never heard of Kneecap. So the Streisand effect definitely worked on me. I've now got all their records, as they say. But they are facing a terror charge. Now, the fella that's been charged, Mo Chara, he's an Irish citizen. It's not an offence to hold up that flag in Ireland, as it never used to be an offence until comparatively recently in the UK. So an artist on stage held a flag and it's subject to a terror charge. Don't you think that they're using sledgehammers to crack nuts, they're crushing butterflies on the wheels, and that will not serve them well?
Well, Kneecap are very articulate, well-informed young men. And I have to say, I had a tinge of envy when I saw that charge coming through, because I thought, what a beautiful opportunity for an articulate, passionate young Irishman to throw back in the face of the British establishment the ludicrousness of being charged on a terrorism charge, when the British state has carried out and continues to carry out unimaginable terrorism towards the nationalist community in the north, and is still obfuscating justice for many friends of mine in the north. So I know that young man will be very articulate if it does go to trial. I can imagine it getting thrown out, but I do think they've made, and this is a kind of a classic thing that the British state does. I think it makes martyrs out of Irish people at a bizarre rate, and turns something that mightn't have even been a story into a massive own goal for the state. I mean, like, if you go back to 1916, that's effectively what happened to the revolutionary leaders. They didn't have much support from the population at all until the British carried out the brutality that they did, and then suddenly we had a revolution. I'm not quite comparing this Kneecap situation to the leaders of 16, but I do think it's an own goal to make a kind of an example out of Mo Chara for waving a Hezbollah flag. I think it happened at a gig in England, so I suppose technically Hezbollah, as you say, are recently a terrorist organisation in accordance with British law. They're not a terrorist organisation as far as I know in Ireland. And of course, as you know, they're not a terrorist organisation in vast swathes of the world. That's another point, I think, that we see the world exclusively through the eyes of the British and the Americans. That's something that we really need to get out of. Because if you travel to most places in the world, they understand that groups like the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah are defending their populations from occupation and colonial atrocities, as is enshrined in international law. So the big thing I think that we need to get out of, and I've been to Lebanon and I've spoken to people who are connected to Hezbollah. They're not monsters. A lot of them are academics. When I was in Lebanon, I visited a center for victims of Israeli atrocities, namely the pager attack, and I listened to testimony from a guy doing his PhD, There was an interior design student who left blind, left maimed. There was one guy who was telling me he was sad that he wasn't able to see his daughter anymore, but he hoped that she'd still grow up to feel proud of him, that he had persisted even after his injuries to kind of live his life and look after his family and stuff. Absolutely heartbreaking stuff that I'm sure the Israelis and the Americans would just say is collateral damage. That's Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a state within a state. It's normal human beings doing normal things. They look after their people a whole lot more than most Western governments do, that's for sure, in terms of social security, education, health. So the monstrification of Hezbollah and these other groups as big baddies and us being the goodies, you'd imagine surely has been blown out of the water in the last 19 months, where we've been collectively manufacturing consent for a genocide. So I think that's a bigger thing that we need to talk about terrorism, I think, in the future. But for now, as you say, a young lad waving a flag at a concert, and the British state like sending spy planes to do the bidding of a rogue state carrying out genocide, and they don't look at themselves. I mean, if they want to take it on, great, but I think it'll be in the great tradition of British justice. It'll be yet another spectacular own goal.
I honestly feel that. I mean, removing myself from it as legally I must do, being in Britain and a British citizen. If you had charged Mo with conduct likely to lead to a breach of the peace or something, you could have issued him with a with a caution in the post. Instead, you've set up the mother of all terror trials for nothing. And you've made the guy and his bandmates international superstars. So even viewed objectively from a political point of view, it is another enormous blunder by the British state, of which there have been many.
Also, George, as you know, the north of Ireland, if they want to open up a can of worms with the flags in the north of Ireland, like, that's going to be a long day. Like, you go to the north of Ireland right now, you see UVF flags flagging on lampposts, so every second lamppost in Belfast is going to be up on a terrorism charge.
Yes, that's true. But I spent. My mother was 90 yesterday, and we were together for her birthday party. Most of the people there were of Irish background, and we were talking about how her father, my maternal grandfather, every single New Year's night at the New Year's night party with a couple of Guinnesses down him, would talk about James Connolly being executed in his chair. He would just repeat that phrase over and over again. They murdered him in his chair. He couldn't even stand up. What a blunder these mass executions in Kilmainham were in 1916. So the British are famous for it. Now, anybody who knows the history of Ireland and its relationship to empire knows the answer, but a lot of people don't know. So explain to us, if you will, as you do brilliantly in the film that you've made with Sean Murray, what's so special about the special relationship between Ireland and Palestine?
Yeah, so I suppose it's the same colonial playbook, isn't it, that was visited on Ireland is now being visited on Palestine. I would have to say, and as this horror is going on, to compare the two, I think is insulting to Palestine, and I think most people would concede that in Ireland. I mean, what the Irish went through versus what the Palestinians are going through right now, it's just on a different planet, I think. And I also think, to be fair, I wouldn't be known for giving the British any credit, but just talking to friends of mine in the north recently, I think everyone agrees the scale of cruelty and depravity of the Israelis right now. Don't think we ever saw the British do that, because they didn't really have, I think they had an ideological superiority to us, but I don't know if they hated us in the way that the Israelis hate the Palestinians. I think it's on a level of, to me, it seems like psychosis. I think Zionism is a psychosis. I think people will look back on it as a kind of a mass national psychosis. But to address your question, yeah, so look, it's the same colonial playbook. I mean, the Irish identify with being taken off their land, being murdered because the colonizer, in our case, the British, felt that we were, religiously and ethnically inferior to them. We had the same demonization, dehumanization. We were depicted as simian, uncouth, terrorists, I suppose. There used to be a Punch magazine that was popular in Britain at the time, which used to kind of manufacture consent for the colonial atrocities in Ireland by depicting us as I say, monkey-like, inferior. There was even a type of I think it was a strenology, I think it's called. It was like a kind of a pseudoscience which tried to prove that the Irish skull was closer to the ape than it was to, say, the Anglo-Saxon skull. So they were trying to prove that we were more associated with apes and closer to Africans, who they had already kind of decreed as the lowest in the scale of humanity. So there was a kind of a pseudoscience to prove that we're just inferior across all metrics, and so we can be dehumanized and it's okay to kill us. And you see that exact same thing today. And I think one of the main things that connect us is, if you're a Palestinian and you have the temerity to stand up and fight back, again, as is enshrined in international law, then you're depicted as a terrorist and you're somehow a warmonger and all you know is violence. And the Irish had the exact same experience. So it's a really deep, I think, understanding of a fellow oppressed colonial people. Again, I think our perspective is very unique because there's not many other countries in Europe that can identify with that. And I suppose there's literal moments in terms of the solidarity then. The Black and Tans, who you'll know of, the most brutal of all of the British forces, literally after the War of Independence in Ireland, left Ireland and took up their station in Palestine, some of the same soldiers. So there's a kind of a literal as well as a spiritual connection between the two countries. And I think that's why a lot of Irish people stand up for Palestine. But what's also happened, though, in the last 19 months, George, is there's a lot of Palestinians here and it's become really personal. Me and others, it would have been a kind of an abstraction in a way, something that you would read about in a book. And I've obviously seen the murals in Belfast, and Irish republicanism at its best is internationalist. We've always stood with Cuba, South Africa, Palestine, but now it's really personal because I've got my friends here in Cork and around the country who are literally waiting to see if their families have been murdered yet, and they're just waiting. And it just makes me so furious that our government here in Ireland, just like every other government in the West, is saying a lot of the right things but is actually doing nothing. It's unconscionable. I can't think of anything like it. We're living through what feels like if you could have lived through the extermination of the indigenous American population. If that was live streamed, that's what it feels like right now. And it's like, as a people, it feels like they're slipping through our hands like sand. And it feels like there's nothing we can do, but yet we keep trying, and I will keep trying. But I just urge anybody listening who has any sway whatsoever in governments to just do something, because you're going to have to explain to your children and your grandchildren why you did nothing during the Gaza Holocaust.
Very powerfully put. Just because of the hour, I need to go to my final question. You've got this series coming up. That's new ground for you, and I'm, for one, looking forward very much to seeing it. Where is it set? How long will it last? And above all, how can people watch it?
Yeah, thanks, George. So I'm going to take a leaf out of your book, and I haven't even done my usual thing of applying to, back in before the genocide, I used to have a little relationship with broadcasters. Obviously, I've done a sitcom here in Ireland, and I was speaking to people in Netflix and BBC and all that kind of stuff. All that is out the window now. They're obviously not going to take on a person like me anyway, but I'm also not even going to reach out to them. I'm just going to do things myself. So it's going to be hosted on my YouTube pages, but I already have a lot of interest from various broadcasters in West Asia to take it on. So I'll host it and I'll allow it for any broadcaster in the world to take it on, even in Israel. Who knows? They might take it on. And it's kind of in the guise of Brass Eye and the Armando Iannucci, Chris Morris kind of satire back in the day. If people remember the brilliance of those
Yeah,
guys, maybe a geopolitical Brass Eye is kind of what I'm gearing towards. The first season is going to be 13 episodes. We're recording in London soon. I have already. Do you know what's the only positive thing about the last 19 months is there's a real clear line of morality. So whilst I've lost a lot of work and I've lost some friends, I've gained so many wonderful friends and people in my life. And there's actually a really high caliber of actor who are already signed up to be involved in the project, and they're on the right side of history. They happen to be good actors, but they're not too weighed down by their paid partnerships. They're not spineless, in other words, and they've been saying and doing the right things over the last 19 months. So you can check it out on YouTube, but if you're in West Asia and who knows where else, you might see it on your TV screens there as well. I would imagine it'll probably be out around September, October, and in the meantime, people can keep up to date with me on Patreon, which is basically where I'm funding everything at the moment. It's my kind of sole source of income. I'm also on YouTube. Who knows? I might be back on Instagram, but wherever I am, I won't be going away, and they won't silence me. I can say that right now. So thank you, George.
Tadhg Hickey, he hasn't gone away, you know. In fact, he's back as big as ever, bigger than ever. He's going to be on your screens over a 13-week first series of what I hope will be a roaring success. Tadhg, thanks very much indeed for joining us
Pleasure's always
on the
mine.
Mother of
Thank you.
All Talk Shows.